Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the breaking news today that wages have fallen at their greatest rate on record, while the Prime Minister who engineered the conditions for it takes his third holiday in the space of a month. But I'd like to also discuss a few other statements that have been thrown about in recent months that have aged like fine milk with this news. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I woke up this morning to the news that the latest from the Office for National Statistics is that wages fell in real terms in the second quarter of this year by the greatest rate on record. My immediate thoughts were to compare this news with what some people have been trying to tell the public over the course of this year. Let's go through a few, shall we? So first of all, a relatively innocuous one. Chair of John Lewis's department stores, Sharon White. She was complaining recently about the number of over 50s who'd left the workforce since the pandemic began. Now, obviously, business leaders are always going to be concerned about a drop in the workforce because it makes it harder to recruit, amongst other things. One of those other things was clearly more in the mind of Dame Sharon, as in an article I was reading about it, she suggested that this causes wage inflation. Now, that's what it's really about, isn't it? You have to pay more money. Now, the theory is not ridiculous. If you have fewer people in the workforce, businesses have to work harder to recruit. If even retail are struggling, you know the workforce is stretched. Of course, as I've mentioned a few times in the past, the government's own figures show we have more jobs available in this country than people to do them, or at least workers available to do them. This is why it's a bit mad to close ourselves off from the continental labour market, but there you go. But in theory, if it's harder for a business to attract staff, then the workers they are trying to attract can make greater demands, which includes pay. So the theory is you're struggling to recruit, you're likely to have to offer higher wages in order to get staff. Higher wages means the workers taking home more money, as most ordinary workers tend to spend most of their wages in the domestic economy, as opposed to profits which bugger off to tax havens. Well, demand for goods and services in the domestic market increases, inflation goes up. Only this isn't what's happened, is it? I mean, we already knew this wasn't happening, but this latest news just blows the whole idea out the water. Wages have dropped in real terms, greater than at any time since we started recording generations ago. And we have had higher inflation, not very often, but we have had higher inflation than we have right now. And yet, wages in real terms hadn't dropped as badly, had they? As an aside, I am genuinely interested in why, when we clearly are struggling for labour to power our economy, workers are also struggling to get the wage increases needed to stay on top of the cost of living. Because there have been some wins I've seen. I follow a number of unions, of course, and every now and then they'll explain how they've won workers an above inflation pay increase. It's all very good. Some relatively big wins, really, for unions in getting their members decent pay rises. But as these official figures show, these people must be the exception, not the norm. The norm is that people's wages are going down. But whatever the reason, it's clearly provably the case that a reduced workforce doesn't always lead to wage inflation. I might also add that even when it does, is that necessarily a bad thing? I would argue that the inflation we've got the biggest problem with is that of corporate profits. But moving on from the relatively unknown head of a retail giant to the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. Now, a few months ago, he was the man that's on £500,000 a year. He was urging workers not to seek wage increases. This was before their latest dire warnings of recession, but after inflation was rising alarmingly. Various Tories in both Parliament and the media were trying to use this argument as well. Oh, you should stop being greedy, you're just making it worse. It was a naked attempt to blame workers demanding more wages for the inflation. Yet when the Bank of England released its analysis of our inflation, the following reasons were cited. The higher energy prices were one of the chief factors, they said. You know, these have not gone up because there's greater demand for energy. We're not using more energy because of lower supply, as well as other factors related to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, they said. Second, they cited higher prices we're having to pay for imports. Well, that's Brexit, basically, isn't it? Bear in mind that Bailey's predecessor, Mark Carney, was very clear that Brexit would prove inflationary. Third, the problem with supplying the goods that people have been buying more of since the pandemic, essentially COVID supply chain issues. Finally, it cited the additional costs that businesses are facing, lower factors, which they have to pass on to customers. That, of course, drives inflation up. These include higher energy costs themselves, because businesses don't get an energy cap. So when an energy company is having its prices capped, they go, well, let's just make businesses pay more then. You know, it includes more Brexit red tape for some businesses that are having to pay more because of that. And it does include wage inflation in their reasons as well, caused by difficulties in attracting staff. So basically, as far as the Bank of England were concerned, the idea of wage inflation is one tiny factor of one of the lesser factors, if not the lesser factor, in the cause of our inflation right now. One small part of the least important factor stated was put down to wage inflation that doesn't even exist in practice, because we know that the official data shows that we've seen the biggest drop in real terms of wages since the records were made. So if anyone tries to argue that people shouldn't be demanding higher wages because it might fuel inflation, we can now point out that we have sky-high inflation right now, at the same time as wage contraction. The Bank of England are being clear about the fact that the biggest drivers of inflation are energy costs and the higher costs of imports, both of which a government with a different political philosophy could deal with. Sometimes I wonder if the problem with Tories is that they don't see money the same way as the rest of us. I think that's where the disconnect is. Because like for most of us, we don't see money as a score in life. It's just what we need to enjoy a comfortable life. Most people don't get to build up any sort of money. It's just, you get it, it comes in, it goes out. That's it. We want to know that we could have a nice enough home, good food, can meet up with friends and family, enjoy a few leisure pursuits. Whereas the Conservative Party is all about enabling the billionaires. And the billionaires are all about the tally. Like once you've gone above a certain level of wealth, there's no spending it. You can't spend it. These people are just driven to make the value of their wealth go higher and higher, as if they're trying to beat the top score in a video arcade. It doesn't represent anything more. Billionaires don't think they need to increase their income so that they can afford a bigger house for their growing family or to have a nice holiday or a new car. Above a certain level, it doesn't change your life at all. You know, the wealthiest people in the world, if you were to halve their level of wealth, what would change in their life? Nothing. They'd be sad because their number was lower. It's just a score that they need to keep pushing. And so their monkeys in Parliament, Tory MPs, don't seem to appreciate that for workers to be happy, they just want to have a decent life in return for their hard work. And the government can do that by either making sure they get more money or by reducing the cost of things that they need money for. It's like, you know, you say to the average worker, do you want to be paid £500 extra a month, or do you want £500 knocking off your bills? The worker will go, I don't care, whichever. Either does. It's the same thing to them. If the government don't want workers to be paid more for fear of stoking wage inflation that clearly isn't happening anyway, make things cheaper. The cost of public services has massively increased because of privatisation and virtually no regulation of that privatised provision. The government can regulate immediately and then nationalise in the longer term. The cost of imports is higher because we raised quite unnecessary trade barriers with our most important markets. We could lower those trade barriers almost immediately. Nobody else wanted them, it's just us. The government have ways of getting wages to meet the cost of living. They can either cause the wages to have to rise or they can reduce the cost of living. They could do either. But what are either of the candidates to be next Prime Minister proposing? Nothing of consequence. As ordinary households face a cost of rise of several thousand more pounds a year, one candidate says they'll save you £1 a week and the other thinks they might save you £1.50 a week. Yeah, great, thanks. Beyond that, their plan is just to blame people for the mess, not do anything about it, just blame. If all they want to do is blame people, they should go and work for a newspaper. They love to employ people who are good at whinging. Government's supposed to be for people who want to do something about the problem. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.